Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I'm going to be doing the rotational video for Dark Knight. Now very quickly before we get into it, I want to say two things. One, I'm not going to be explaining what all of these skills do for Dark Knight. I have a video up on that yesterday, so you can go and check that out if you need more information. And two, my plugin ended up breaking that shows what buttons are being pressed in terms of like how the rotation is going. So I can't show that unfortunately enough for this video, but I will have a opener up on the screen at least when that happens, so you can follow along with that. But the rest of the rotation, you'll just kind of have to see what buttons are being pressed on my hotbars. Unfortunately enough, I'll try to get that fixed for the next video. So let's get started with the rotation itself. For the opener, we're going to be using both the Blackest Night and Blood Weapon pre-pull. The reasoning behind it is we want to have our Blood Weapon up as early as possible so that we get enough blood gauge to summon our Living Shadow, because that does have a very long spawning animation, which is why we're using our Blood Weapon pre-pull. Now, because we're using Blood Weapon pre-pull, we're also going to be generating mana on our very first GCD that we use, hence why we also use the Blackest Night. Now, if the boss does not end up breaking your Blackest Night by just the auto attacks that happen at the beginning of the fight, you can leave that out, but hopefully the TBN does break and then you get your mana refunded in the form of that Dark Arts. If that's not the case, just leave the TBN out. It's better to get your Living Shadow out as soon as possible than it is to, of course, not lose any mana ticks. Now, going from our opener to our 1 minute burst, there's going to be two things that we have to pay attention to. So the first thing is that we do not use Blood Weapon on cooldown, because we use it pre-pull in the opener. We want to be delaying it by 3 GCDs. So in general, what we'll be doing is we use Delirium, then we use 2 GCDs, then we use Blood Weapon, and then we go into our burst. So for all of the consecutive bursts that you'll be seeing me do, you'll see that I use Delirium, I wait 2 GCDs, because of course your normal GCDs do not eat into the Delirium stacks, which is amazing, which is also why we can do that. So Delirium, 2 GCDs, Blood Weapon, and then we go into our burst. Now, in terms of what skills we want to be using, of course all of our 1 minute skills want to be used during this 1 minute window, with the exception of Shadowbringer. That one we are going to be trying to pull towards our 2 minute window. Now, if your 2 minute window is a bit too busy, because there's a lot of buttons to be pressed in there, you could technically use it every 1 minute, but that is going to be a damage loss, because at 2 minutes, that is where we have our raid buffs up as well for everyone. Unless of course you have a ninja, then you have it at 1 minute as well. But in general, all of your raid buffs are going to be there for the 2 minute window, which is why we want to be pulling our Shadowbringer casts for that 2 minute window and not use it at the 1 minute. So during our 2 minutes, it's going to be looking a little bit different. We have our Living Shadow here again, then of course both of our Shadowbringers cast as well, so it is going to be a little bit more busy than our 1 minute window, but it's not that much more busy. As for our Salted Earth, we are just going to be using this on cooldown, so that's not always going to be lining up with our burst, because it is on an awkward 90-second recast timer. Now, because of that, it is going to be lining up with our opener, which is where we have our potion, so that's really good. Then the second one is just going to be between bursts, so that's kind of unfortunate. The third cast is going to be at our 1 minute burst window, which again, usually won't have any raid buffs unless you have a ninja, so also again a little bit unfortunate, but then it will again line up with your 6 minutes, and 6 minutes is where we do have those potions available as well. And of course we also have our 2 minute raid buffs, so that is also going to be another very strong alignment. So in general, for your burst windows, we want to have in there our Delirium, our Blood Weapon, as many usages of Edge of Shadow as we can, because of course we are going to be pooling together as much mana as possible to fit inside that burst window. We're also saving up blood gauge for it, and then of course, because we have Delirium, we get to use 3 extra blood spillers because of that as well. Carven Spit, and then our 2 plunges. You can use plunge outside of your burst window if you need it for movement, but if it is possible, try to save it for the burst window so that you can get both of them in there. So that's what the 1 minute burst window looks like. For our 2 minutes, we're just going to be adding on the Living Shadow as well as our 2 Shadowbringers. Now, for your Living Shadow, this thing requires 50 blood gauge, and you can't use your Delirium stacks on it. So when the 2 minute burst window comes up, make sure that you have 50 blood gauge saved so that you can use that Living Shadow as it comes off cooldown, because again, it does have a fairly lengthy cast animation, so you want to be able to press that thing as soon as it becomes ready. And then of course we have our opener and our 6 minutes. That's where we'll be pressing 2 more buttons into our burst, which is with that salted earth. And then of course on our 3 minutes we have salted earth as well. So Dark Knight in general, very busy job when it comes down to the burst windows, because we have a lot of buttons that we're pressing in there, and then between our burst windows we barely have anything going on. We just press our 1, 2, 3 buttons, that's pretty much it. Outside of that we'll have a salted earth here and there whenever it is ready, but outside of that, just pressing 1, 2, 3, you'll use maybe 1 or 2 blood spillers if you have enough blood gauge, because of course we do not wish to overcap this blood gauge. We'll be spending it when we need to, and we'll also be using a edge of shadow here or there, depending on if you're going to be overcapping on your mana. And then of course, if need be, you can always use the Blackest Night, and then you can pull the extra mana that you can save from that, with of course getting the Dark Arts proc on your like your job gauge. You can save that to use inside of your burst window, because you never have to use more than 1 edge of shadow between bursts. So if that edge of shadow becomes a Blackest Night, then that means that we have an extra edge of shadow to use during our burst window. So that's pretty much what the Dark Knight rotation looks like. We're coming up on the 6-minute window. So I'm just gonna leave it play out a little bit more so you can see what the 6-minute looks like as well. It's again just going to be a very busy window, because it's, well, kind of similar like the opener, because we have everything lined up there. Again, we have our Delirium, we have our Blood Weapon, 2 Plunges, 2 Shadowbringers, Carven Spit, Salted Earth, and then of course Salt and Darkness, which is the second combo ability of that as well, and then also our Living Shadow, as well as any other like mana spenders that we can use in the form of Edge of Shadows as well. So use Delirium, 1, 2, summon Living Shadow, enable that Blood Weapon, and then we just go nuts pressing all of our off-global cooldowns. Generally you'll be able to just spam all your off-global cooldowns between using a lot of Deliriums, and then once you, not Deliriums, Blood Spillers, and then once you run out of those Delirium charges, you'll usually have some blood gauge as well, from of course having used that Blood Weapon, and also maybe having saved up some blood gauge as well. So that kind of does it for the Dark Knight rotation. Again, apologies for not being able to show it on top of the screen, because the plugin broke again. I'll try to get it fixed by the next video, but hopefully I can get that fixed, because there were some weird things going on with the website. Hopefully it's something on my end that went wrong and not something on the plugin's end, because then of course that is going to be a little bit more complicated to get that fixed. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for the Dark Knight rotation. I'll let out the last burst window play out as well, so you can see it one last time. Delirium, 1, 2, we get our Blood Weapon, and then we just go nuts pressing all of the buttons. So if you have any more questions, then feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll definitely get back to you. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.